The sun was just beginning to stretch over the rolling hills of Clover Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and soft amber as Mason Harper wiped the oil off his hands with a worn-out rag. The morning was quiet, just the occasional chirp of birds, the rustling of cornfields, and the soft hum of an old John Deere tractor waiting patiently by the barn. Mason's shop, Harper Repairs, stood like a steadfast soldier at the edge of town. Part garage, part sanctuary for a man who had quietly held the weight of the past decade in the lines around his eyes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a layer of rural grit that only hard years and harder work could etch into a man's soul. His daughter Annie, now 7, was skipping pebbles into the pond across the road, unaware that today was the day their quiet lives would shift. The moment the jet flew over the town, so low and out of place, it startled the birds into a frenzy. Everyone looked up. Jets didn't come to Clover Ridge. The airstrip hadn't seen action since the state fair ran out of funds. But this jet's leak. Silver and screaming money circled once and landed on the old runway like it had been summoned by fate. From the window of the jet stepped a woman in a sharp white blazer and black heels. Her hair coiled in a bun so perfect it seemed drawn with a pen. Julia Whitmore had returned. It had been 8 years since she drove off in her mother's battered Pontiac with a scholarship letter in one hand and tears streaking her cheeks. She had left behind everything: her dying father's farm, the broken down tractor they couldn't afford to fix, and the boy who had once kissed her under the stars and promised he'd wait. But she didn't come back for nostalgia. No, Julia came back for business, or so she told herself. As head of international acquisitions at a New York firm, she'd made a name out of turning dying companies into gold mines. And now her mother's old land, rumored to be sitting atop untapped natural gas, was on her company's radar. A merger. A deal. That's all it was supposed to be. She didn't count on running into Mason. Mason hadn't aged the way most men did. He carried time. Like a badge, every scar on his hand a chapter of resilience. He didn't speak much when she first walked into his garage, stilettos tapping against the concrete like they didn't belong. The Rand they didn't. "My mother's tractor," she said stiffly, still in the shed. "It needs fixing." He didn't answer right away, just stared at her, eyes unreadable. And then he said the only words that could have cracked the wall around her. "You look tired, Jules." No one had called her that in years. It broke her a little. That night, Julia stayed at her old farmhouse, now swallowed by weeds and silence. She opened drawers lined with memories, Polaroids, dusty cookbooks, notes scribbled in her father's handwriting. Outside, the porch light flickered, like it was trying to remember how to shine. But in the garage down the road, Mason worked. He didn't ask why she really came back. He didn't pry. He just rolled up his sleeves and brought the old tractor back to life. Annie showed up the next day with a plate of cookies and questions. "Are you a movie star?" she asked, peering at Julia with wide eyes. Julia laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "No," she said. "Just someone who used to be from here." Mason watched the two of them. From the porch, something stirring in him that he hadn't let surface in years. Julia found herself coming to the shop more than she needed. She'd bring coffee. Ask about tractors. Pretend she didn't notice the way Mason's hand lingered, too long on hers. One night, after Annie had fallen asleep in the back seat of Mason's truck, Julia and Mason sat on the hood under the stars, the same sky they used to wish under. "I thought you forgot about me," he said. She whispered, "I tried." They kissed, soft and slow, like a song remembered. But nothing in Clover Ridge was ever simple. When Julia's firm found out she hadn't pushed the deal forward, they sent someone to remind her, either close the acquisition or step down. It was supposed to be easy. Sell the land, leave again. But now there was a little girl who called. Her Miss Jet lady, a man who fixed broken things with his hands, and a town that still remembered who she used to be. Julia stood at a crossroads. One path led back to Manhattan and the life she built with blood and brilliance. The other, back to the man she once loved, the daughter he raised alone, and the future she never dared to dream of. On the morning the jet came to take her back, the whole town gathered at the strip. Not to say goodbye, but to see if she'd leave again. Mason didn't come. He stayed in the garage, pretending to fix things that didn't need fixing. Annie waited by the window. And just when it seemed the jet would leave without her, Julia stepped off. Wasn't wearing heels. She wore boots, jeans, and a heart wide open. The jet roared and disappeared into the clouds, leaving behind a silence thick with possibility. She walked down Main Street, past the diner, the bookstore, the place where she first kissed Mason under the oak tree. She found him under the hood of a truck, and when he saw her, he didn't smile. "Forgot something?" said. Julia nodded, tears shining. "Yeah," she said. "You." And as Annie ran into her arms, laughter echoing like a hymn across. The fields Clover Ridge exhaled. Love, like tractors and hearts, can be fixed, and some girls don't leave forever. Some girls come back in a jet and stay for good. The next morning, after the jet disappeared into the clouds without her, the town buzzed with whispers like bees in a clover patch. Julia Whitmore was staying. Not just for a weekend, not just for repairs. She was staying for Mason Harper, for Annie, and for something deep in her bones she didn't yet know how to name. At first, Mason didn't make it easy. He kept to himself, repairing equipment, plowing through his work like if he could just stay busy enough. Maybe the pain of her first departure wouldn't sting again. Because even if she had stepped off the jet, even if she had looked him in the eyes and said, "You," there was still that bruise between them. The one shaped like years of silence, like unanswered letters and never-dialed phone calls. Julia, for her part, didn't try to bulldoze through it. She helped around the farm, clumsily at first, tripping over coiled hoses, misjudging the weight of feed sacks. But with each sunrise, she remembered how the land smelled at dawn, how the wheat turned gold under summer skies, how Mason's laugh when it finally returned sounded like home. Annie adored her. She braided Julia's hair on the porch steps, taught her how to bake peanut butter cookies the Harper way, and asked questions like only children do. "Why did you leave, Julia?" Didn't lie. "I was scared," she said. Scared. Of what? Of being ordinary. Of staying. Of not becoming someone. Annie frowned, then smiled. "You're someone now. You're my almost mom," Julia cried then, quietly, holding Annie close. She had once run toward ambition like it was a race she couldn't afford to lose. Now she found herself running toward stillness. But peace is rarely uninterrupted. One humid afternoon, while Julia was sorting through paperwork in the dusty barn office, she found an envelope addressed to her late mother. Inside was a letter unsigned, unsealed, but dated only a month before her mother's passing. It was a buyout offer from a gas company, with Mason's signature at the bottom. Heart stopped. Had he tried to sell the land behind her back? Was that why he was so willing to fix the tractor and play the hero? Rage boiled cold and tight in her throat. She didn't confront him right away. She carried the letter like a ticking clock in her pocket, afraid of the answer but unable to let it go. That night, she went to the diner and asked Doris, the old waitress with a memory sharper than a steel plow, about the land. "Sweetheart," Doris said, pouring her a cup of coffee laced with wisdom, "Mason only signed that to stop the company from bulldozing your mama's grave. They wanted—" The West Hill he made a deal to stall M. Never took a cent. Julia exhaled like she hadn't breathed in days. She walked straight to Mason's garage, letter in hand, and found him under the hood of an old Ford. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. He didn't flinch. "Didn't think it'd matter. You were leaving, but I didn't." Not. Yet silence. Thick. Weighty. Then Julia stepped closer. "I want to stay. Not just here. With you. With Annie." Mason looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You sure? 'Cause loving me ain't some city contract? It's messy. It's forever." She took his hand. "That's the only kind I want." The next few weeks unfolded like a dream stitched in hay and heat. They took Annie to the county fair. Julia, in denim for the first time in a decade, entered a pie contest and lost horribly, but Mason swore it was the best damn pie he'd ever eaten. They sat on the porch swing, fingers intertwined, watching lightning bugs dance like magic. Julia took freelance consulting jobs, built a small office in the farmhouse attic, and let her city heels gather dust. For the first time, her success didn't feel like it came at the cost of her heart. Then one night, under the harvest moon, Mason asked her the question that had lived in his chest since she came back. You ever wonder what life would have been like if you'd stayed? Julia touched his face, brushed a thumb across the scar on his chin he'd gotten the week she left. Every day, she whispered. But maybe I needed to leave to know where home really was. He didn't propose with a ring right then, no grand gesture, just a promise. Then let's not waste any more time. Word spread fast, like all things do in towns like Clover Ridge, that Mason Harper and Julia Whitmore were getting married. The whole town pitched in. The florists offered sunflowers for free. The local baker made a cake tall enough to be seen from the barn loft. Annie picked out Julia's dress herself, simple cream cotton gown that flowed like poetry. The wedding was held on Mason's land. Between the tractor he'd fixed and the tree where they'd carved their initials as teenagers, Julia walked down the aisle barefoot, the earth soft and warm beneath her. Mason waited in a crisp white shirt, hands shaking only slightly. Annie stood between them, holding both their hands. Do you, Julia, promise to never leave without saying goodbye? The preacher asked. Julia smiled, tears sparkling. Promise. And do you, Mason, promise to love her even when she burns dinner and forgets to put gas in the tractor? He grinned. I do. When they kissed, it wasn't fireworks. It was a sunrise after a long storm. It was roots digging deep. It was love, real and raw, and finally home. After the wedding, Julia and Mason danced under string lights hung from the rafters. Annie spun in circles, laughing, twirling with ribbons in her hair. The town celebrated like they'd waited years for this moment, because they had. People came not just for the wedding, but for the story of the girl who left, who chased the world, and who came back in a jet, not just to claim land or riches, but love. True love, and a family, waiting to be whole. And so, the girl who left in a Pontiac and returned in a jet didn't fly away again. She planted her life beside the man who fixed her tractor and unknowingly fixed her heart. They built a home of small things, sunlit kitchens, muddy boots, school recitals, Sunday dinners. In that quiet miracle called everyday life, Julia found something she never did in Manhattan. Not power, not wealth, but peace. And in that peace, love bloomed endlessly.